What is heaven like? A lot of Christians ask this question. Now, when I'm talking about what is heaven like, I'm not talking about heaven as in the intermediate state. I'm talking about heaven as in the new heavens and the new earth. What will it be like to live in eternity with God? Could it be possibly that our idea of what heaven would be like has been shaped and molded by secular culture more than by Scripture? And could it be that science fiction is more truth than we think? Today on FreeThinking Ministries, we explore, is heaven kind of like science fiction? Make sure you like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed, I don't know what you're doing. Please subscribe to the channel and share this video for anybody who is just wondering, well, what will we be doing for eternity? That sounds boring. What will we be doing? Share this video, share this podcast with them to help encourage them here today. So about, a couple months ago, I wrote an article with a friend of the program and FreeThinking Ministries contributor, Thomas Moller, and he is going to be joining us here today. Welcome back to the channel, Thomas.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Josh.
Yes, it's good to have you back. Tim is gallivanting around Utah right now, sharing the gospel with people. So we thought that this would be a good episode to have, instead of talking Molinism and possible worlds, feasible worlds, all that sort of stuff, to really dive kind of deep, or at least scratch the surface. We're probably just going to scratch the surface, actually. But it might feel deep to some people about this concept of heaven. I remember when I was in college, let me know if you experienced any of these sensations. When I was in college, and this is kind of embarrassing for me to admit, because I was a believer and I was studying pastoral ministries, and I was like, I really want to get married and have kids before Jesus comes back. I want to experience that before Jesus comes back. Like almost this dread of what life on this earth. I want to experience it to the fullest before I get to heaven. Did you ever have any of those thoughts, or am I just the oddball?
Well, I just remember after getting married, kind of remember like, oh yeah, we're not going to be married in heaven, being pretty bummed out about it. And of course, that's concerning all the glory of heaven, that's kind of a silly thought too. So
yes. So this is like when we talk about heaven, when Christians talk about heaven, we have to remember we're talking about the perfect state of things, and we're trying to think about that in an imperfect state. So right now, like you and I are living in all sorts of sin and frustration. We experience good things, but it's an imperfect state. And so we're trying to comprehend this perfect state. How do you imagine heaven being as far as the perfect state? Because you brought something up that I thought was good.
Well, essentially when I think of, obviously we have Revelations, which tells us the future of what heaven will be, but there's still not a lot of detail about what the life is like. And so I think probably one of the best pictures we have would be Genesis in the Garden of Eden, because you have, obviously it's new creation, it's perfect, there is no sin, garden's perfect, Adam and Eve are perfect, God is walking with them in the garden, and that's how I would think it would be like. And that's probably going to be better. I mean, Revelation's pictures a better future, yeah. But I would think it's going to be life without sin, just like the garden was.
So the idea, like in Genesis, is people ask, well, what if the fall had never happened? It seems like the plan, if the fall had never happened, would be to expand the garden to envelop the globe, right?
Yeah.
And for it to be one big Garden of Eden.
What I think is the natural part of being human is development of culture and technology. And this is something I was thinking about earlier before, actually when we were writing the article too, was that something that's different about the creation story that Christians have as opposed to other cultures is that we are other cultures, like that people were given fire or tools by the gods, whereas humanity, God allowed us to develop and explore and create things. Because in the lineage, though it's Cain's lineage, it talks about someone who is a bronze worker or a shepherd, or musical instruments, stuff like that. So I think that's where it's like there's going to be so much more than just gardening to eternity.
Yes, and I think it's interesting because in this imperfect state, we have clearly been able to develop good things.
Hmm.
Technology is good. Right now, I'm sitting in an office in a studio that's air conditioned. That's kind of fits. I know it's colder where you are currently, but it feels fantastic where I am, and it's kind of like this is good. I think this is good. It's comfortable. It's good. Obviously, comfort isn't the only thing that measures goodness, but it seems to me that it's not like technology goes away at the consummation of time, but that it's perfected. Like it's no longer the 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 swords are beat into pruning shears, right? It's no longer used for evil in that sense. And so I think we can look forward to even computers and stuff. I don't think that stuff goes away. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I would agree with that because again, technology in itself is not like an evil or a sinful thing. Um, cause I think there's been a lot of good that comes out of technology, and maybe we won't need modern medicine would be an example of the good that's come out of technology, and maybe we won't need modern medicine, but again, you got uh, like you said, air conditioning, and that's nice. You have plumbing. Not that we'll need to necessarily eat or drink in heaven, but I think there's a lot of good things that have come out of technology. I don't see the reason why that would necessarily cease.
Yeah. Even travel, like vehicles,
Yeah.
things like that. Perhaps that's possible. Perhaps it's not. Perhaps we won't need cars, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I do think buildings, those sorts of things. Do they just
Mhm.
appear? Will we still be working? I don't think work is a product of the fall. Work is something
No.
we actually were created to do, and so I do believe there will be work in heaven. Now, there won't be toil because that's different, but there will be work. So one of the things that we wrote about, again, it's called Heaven and Science Fiction, is the idea of what if heaven was more like science fiction than we thought. I know when I first floated this idea out to you, I think we were sitting at a table at a Mexican restaurant, and I
Yeah.
was like, I've been kind of wanting to explore this. What if? Because I'm a big science fiction. Are you a big science fiction guy? Did you like Star
Oh yeah,
Trek and stuff?
Star Wars and even you got all the superhero movies and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of.
Yeah. And if Tim were here, he would bring up Doctor Strange
Yeah.
probably. uh, we don't need to do that. But I was big. I love Star Wars, Star Trek growing up. The idea of exploring the stars. I remember Star Trek The Next Generation, space, the final frontier. It's kind of like there's sort of wonder in that made me
Mhm.
think well, what if we're thinking way too local as far as heaven goes? And I think we need to be clear now. When we're speaking of heaven in this conversation, you and I, we're
Mhm.
not talking about the intermediate state, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very, very different.
Yes.
This is supposed to be what we are discussing is at the end of the age when new heaven, new earth, and we have our resurrected bodies. Because in the intermediary state, there's we won't have bodies. It'll be
Yes.
souls in the I guess current heaven in the presence of God.
Yeah. Because heaven is where God is, and that's really that's really so people are in heaven. I don't think you're
Mhm.
wrong in saying, oh, they've gone to be with the Lord, they're in heaven. Sure, but it's
Yeah.
not the new heaven, right? It's not the
Yeah.
new heavens and the new earth, and there's going to be a physical component to eternity in the new heaven, and I think that that's important. Some people think we're just going to be disembodied spirits floating around
Mhm.
playing disembodied harps all the time. If that was heaven, don't sign me up as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
seems a little boring. Yeah, one of my kids earlier said, "Did you know God lives in the sky?" And I was like, "Oh, we need to have a little bit of a conversation here because you're going to be confused as you get older and make the mistake that Sam Harris made." Because I don't know if you know this. I wrote an article called "My Heaven's Not in the Stars" because Sam Harris came out and said, "Well, if heaven was out there, we've got all sorts of telescopes and stuff. Surely we would have found it
Oh,
by now." And it's like even
boy.
early in Christian theology. Even early in Christian theology, the understanding was not that heaven was part of this dimension, at least
Yeah.
the current heaven. I mean, you can just see Elijah with his, open his eyes. You see the spirit realm, and then
Mhm.
Stephen, the heavens open to him.
Yeah.
I don't think he thought, "Oh, look, I'm peering at Mars, and that's where God is. That's where God is standing." So there's a different component to that. There's another a dimension, but God will remake this dimension into a perfect dimension, and so.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about, and I think it's important for people to know, is that the central thesis kind of our article, or at least of my thought, is John 17:3. And John 17:3 says this. It says, "Now this is eternal life, that they may know you, the one true God, and the one that you sent, Jesus Christ." That's John 17:3. That's in Jesus' high priestly prayer. And I remember thinking about this, and this was kind of the impetus for thinking about this article and writing this article was, what does it mean that eternity is to know God, right? Like, if you think about it, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, when we think of eternal life, we just think of living forever,
Yeah.
right? But so if eternity is that, then that's the goal of eternity, which kind of reminds me of what you said about the garden. Like, what were they doing in the garden, right? They were knowing God.
Yeah.
So that was kind of our central thesis was, hey, or at least mine, was John 17:3, eternal life is knowing the one true God. Well, how do we know people? How do we know individuals and beings, not just plants or animals, but how do we know people closest to us? And the way we know the people that are closest to us is, of course, knowing facts and things about them. Like when I was in high school, or actually it was in elementary school. Wow. It was in elementary school. I wanted to write a research paper on somebody, and I wrote it on Michael Jordan. Do you know who Michael Jordan is, Thomas?
Yes. Yes.
I do. Okay. All right. Do you have an opinion? Is Michael Jordan the GOAT?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. I was gonna say we'll end this now. So I knew a lot about him because I studied about him and all this stuff, but no one would say I knew him. So there is a personal component to knowledge, right? To knowing somebody. But then, like, I think of like my wife. If I were to say I know my wife, and somebody would say, "Oh, well, what does she like to do?" And I would say, "Well, I don't really know facts about her. I just, know her." Like, you would be like, your marriage is in trouble. Are you tracking with me there?
Oh yeah.
So I think the component of knowing God is both of those things. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just because there's so much more than just just a personal knowing him. But I mean, like, because you have to know his characteristics, who he, not just like, you need to know his characteristics and his life and what he's done. I mean, his life is eternal life, but there's so much more to that. And then also on the flip side, as theologians and scholars, we can't just know facts about them. It's also important that we do know them personally. So there is just that duality there, where they're both equally important.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think the danger of academia is you reduce God to an experiment that you're just trying to know facts about him, and clearly that's not what we want. But then there's like the pendulum swinging all the way to the other end, where it's like, well, I just know Jesus personally. I don't need to read my Bible. I just pray to him. And it's kind of that loosey goosey new age sort of stuff that I think we need to not have in our culture either. So I think it seems to me that heaven, then, if it's knowing God, the one true God, and the one he sent, Jesus Christ, that means there's a component of both knowing about God and knowing God personally. And you have children, right? And they make probably little crafts for you and like little pictures, things like that. Yeah. So one of the ways to know somebody is to know their handiwork, to know the thing. Like if your kid brings a little picture to you and says, "Look what I made," it actually brings you closer to your child.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so sweet. You're knowing their handiwork. No one else understands the handiwork.
Yeah.
Like when somebody comes to my office and sees the picture that my 7-year-old drew for me, they don't appreciate it because they don't know her like I know her.
Mm-hmm.
So which then means, if you're tracking with me here, if we're going to go to heaven and we know first God's things about God and then God personally, only people who know Jesus Christ and could actually appreciate his handiwork.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's 100% true. I mean, Even looking at today before before we're in heaven, I do think. I mean, obviously, atheists and non-Christians have an appreciation for everything around us and nature and the cosmos, but I do think there's a special love and joy that we can get from it, knowing that God made this. Like his hand made this, and he made this earth for us, and he made us individually. I think there is that is something special that Christians can have with that personal knowledge of God.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, and even if you think of like the best artists in the world, I can appreciate their artistry. It's like, wow, that's
Mhm.
amazing. But if they were my father, there's a
Yeah.
whole different appreciation that goes into that, right? Because it's like, wow, I know what toil you went through to do this. I
Mhm.
know where this. I think of like I wrote not that I'm trying to publicize my own book, but I did write a book called Fracture,
Shameless
and
self
we
plug.
yes, shameless plug. I wrote a book called Fracture. It's kind of like a futuristic sort of book. It's a novel, and people can read that and get a glimpse into my mind and appreciate the story for what it is, if they like the story or not. So I don't even know if it's any good, because it's hard to tell if it's good when you self-publish. And anyway, but people who know me and have read it have this connection to me, where hopefully they're being objectively objective when they talk about it. But then they're like, well, I could see what you were saying because I know you. Whereas somebody who doesn't know me might read it and get a different idea of what I was trying to say there, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that's similar to what you're saying. It's like, of course, atheists can look around at the world, and non-Christians can look around at the cosmos and 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 appreciate its beauty, but we don't appreciate it as handiwork of the
Hmm.
one true God. And this gets us into this idea of heaven is more like science fiction than you'd think. Uh, and what did you think when I first kind of floated that idea to you? For those who don't know, as Tim would say, Thomas is an astrophysicist. Okay, he studied astrophysics in undergrad.
It's not a complete degree.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not count.
yeah.
As much as Tim would like it to.
We're just throwing Tim under the bus a bunch today, but that's okay. We can do that. But what were your thoughts as we were sitting there and having that conversation, talking about writing this article?
Well, I mean, my first thought, I mean, goes to just honestly the immensity of the universe, um, and the thought of traveling it. That's actually has always been a dream of mine from at least my teenage years. Was like, I hope that like in heaven I get to travel space to see, because I mean, there's no indication that the entire universe is going to disappear.
Yeah.
From just because it's going to be recreated and renewed, but I would
Mm-hmm.
imagine it'll still be there. And so when you first brought up the idea of sci-fi being real and connecting that with heaven, I was like, oh, space travel for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have a favorite sci-fi show or movie?
It is honestly, it's more just Star Wars. Star Wars is definitely my
Okay.
favorite. Just yeah, that's pretty typical, but just
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
love the space scenes and all the different planets they visited, and so
Are you a prequels or original trilogy guy?
probably original trilogy.
There you go. You know how to get on my good side, calling Michael Jordan the GOAT, and prequels in the original trilogy. That's right. We'll keep you around. So I loved this show called Stargate SG-1. Have you ever heard of it?
I haven't seen it though.
Okay. I loved this show. So people who know me are like, oh yeah. So my wife is, if she's listening to this, is like, oh yeah, he watches that a lot. You can find it on Netflix, I think, on Amazon Prime. But they find this. It's basically like an ancient aliens thing, where it's like the aliens built the pyramids and came as gods, and it's like this. Um, it's this theory that turns out to be true. It's sci-fi, and they find this ring, and then they figure out how to turn it on, and it has this exploding bubble, and it's basically a wormhole. You can go from one world to another in a wormhole. I'm sure the science is horrible, um, but I love that. And as I'd watch it, be like, man, I'm not convinced that there's life elsewhere in the universe. Maybe there is. It doesn't really matter all that much to me. I think it doesn't So people will say it will undermine your faith. I don't think that there's any necessity to undermine my faith if there's life on other planets. Now, what that does theologically as far as the atonement, if that life also has fallen, I don't know. But the Bible's written for us here on Earth. It's not written for people in other planets. But all of that to say, I've always also been like, well, what are all these planets for? And I think atheists have had the same thing. Have you heard it said like, well, then what's all this stuff for? Like, why, if God, if this is all created, why couldn't he just create the solar system? Right? And that's a common objection. Well, not maybe objection, but what would you say? Like tongue-in-cheek mocking?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the answer is obviously like, well, because the heavens declare the glory of God and the works of his hands, and even seeing it, if we go where there's no light pollution, we look up at the skies and we like, certainly there's something bigger than us that created all of this. But I think there's even more to it. There's even more to it. And that's what we talked about heaven as science fiction. So if you've watched this far, this is where we're going to get into this. Thomas, drop some knowledge on us now, Mr. Astrophysicist. What would it even take? I think I saw Elon Musk tweet out a video. I wish I could find it. Maybe I will try to find it and plug it into this episode. But like an animation of how long it would take to get to just each planet in our solar system on like a 747, like traveling the speed of 747 does.
Yeah, that would not be. That would take a long time.
No, it was like 400 years to Venus or something like that. It was crazy. It was more than I thought. But just the immensity, people don't realize just even the immensity of the solar system.
Yeah.
Right. So let's give people, just as we think about exploring the stars, what are we looking at?
Well, so the nearest star is roughly 4.2 4.25 light years away, and that's like about 25 trillion miles. I can't even imagine a number that big. About 25 trillion miles. And I did the math earlier, but on our fastest probe, the Parker Solar Probe, which goes about 430,000 miles per hour, it would take like 6,500 years to get to the nearest star on our fastest moving space probe. Like that.
That's more than a few lifetimes.
Yeah. That's, if you're a young Earth creationist, that's about the time span of the Earth.
Yeah. Yeah. So 25 trillion is equal to 25,000 billion, right?
Yeah.
And so I was trying to look it up in thousands, and I can't even read the number. 25 billion thousands or something like that, or
yeah.
So it's a lot. It's a lot. How long would it take to get to the nearest galaxy?
So
is Andromeda the nearest one?
Yeah, Andromeda is the nearest galaxy. It's 2.5 million light years. So 14.7 quintillion miles away. That's a whole other order up from trillion. And it would take like almost 4 billion years.
Okay.
So we're not getting there anytime soon.
No. There was another Stargate show. There's there's branch offs of all these shows, and one of the Stargate shows is like the spaceship, and it's actually having to travel between galaxies. They're trying to figure out how to travel between galaxies. It's kind of interesting. It ended up getting canceled because it really wasn't that entertaining. It was too sciencey. But people's eyes glazed over. But when you think about science fiction, they make it look easy, right? Because it's all in a studio. You hit the warp button or the speed of light button. Well, it's funny because Star Wars is like, hey, we're going to go 2 times the speed of light. Well, even if you went 2 times the speed of light, even if you could do that, we don't even know if you can go the speed of light, right?
Yeah.
Even if you could go 2 times the speed of light, that's only dividing the distance in half, kind of, right?
Yeah.
So it's like still going to take forever to get there.
Yeah.
And so science fiction is like a pipe dream. And so it's like Well, what do you mean that heaven is more like science fiction? Well, if you're thinking, well, because it's an eternity, we could get in our spaceship and actually hang out for a billion years and make it someplace.
I guess we could.
I guess you could make that argument, but we're going to make actually a different argument in our article, and it stems from this idea that when Jesus, so Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection, right? So there are other people that are resurrected, but they're really more resuscitated. So like Lazarus is resuscitated, he's going to die. The Elijah resuscitates the boy, he's going to die. There's this story about Paul either healing or resuscitating a guy that fell out of a window because he fell asleep in Acts. We don't know if the guy was dead or but he was healed. Those are all resuscitations. Those people all died. So when we talk about Jesus as the first fruits of the resurrection, what we're saying is he has his glorified body as the God-man, and so he is the first fruits of what we can look forward to. That's just not even controversial theologically.
Yeah.
In any sort of orthodox terms. So what I'm saying here should not be controversial. So we look at what Jesus could do in his resurrected body, and we looked at a few aspects of the fact that when the room is locked, and it says specifically the room is locked, and then Jesus appears among them, right? And so the idea is, could it be that we could have that same ability in the new heavens and the new earth? Do you think that I'm off my rocker here, or do you think we're tracking with the biblical witness data?
I think it's very probable. I suppose we can't know exactly for sure, but I don't see why it's not probable. Because he is described as he's the first fruits of the resurrection, and we know we're going to have glorified bodies and new bodies with potentially different abilities. Paul talks about taking off the clothes, and that'd be when he's in heaven and just a soul, then putting on more. And so it seems to indicate a different type of body than what we're used to. And I don't see why not we can't at least consider the idea that it could be similar abilities to what Christ has.
Yeah, and so if that's the case, I propose, and we have proposed in this article, again, you can read it, Heaven and Science Fiction. It's linked in the description. But we propose that it is at least possible, if not probable, that this is not just an earthbound ability, that Jesus also ascended into heaven, which we don't know exactly what that means, but he's able to transcend space and time to get into heaven, basically. We don't know exactly what that means as far as what the heavenly dimension is currently. But if that's the case, I think it's at least possible, if not probable, that we could move, and I love the way you put it, because you thought of these words in our article, we could move at the speed of thought. So why don't you unpack what we mean by that?
Well, yeah. By the speed of thought would be, if we're assuming that Jesus at will can, in his resurrected body, materialize, show up basically anywhere, then if we would have the same ability, then essentially we would be able to think of a location and appear there, but and be able just to move instantaneously. So then the idea would be, okay, I want to go to Saturn, and I would then go to Saturn in the blink of an eye, essentially.
Yes, and then we wouldn't have to worry, seemingly, about the constraints of our physical bodies. They're perfected, or maybe we are able to develop some sort of technology. Since technology, like we said at the beginning of this episode, is likely not going to cease, we're able to understand technology in such a way that we can create certain suits, and the economics is completely different. Even if you couldn't breathe on Saturn, we're capable. Jesus didn't appear naked everywhere. He had the clothes on that he had on. So even if the physics are such that, well, you still couldn't breathe on Saturn, right? Or you would get crushed on the surface of Venus or whatever. even if that were the case, if it's still that way, we could maybe develop technology to be able to deal with those constraints in order to move at the speed of thought to those locations, or even just sit in space and observe God's handiwork. And my argument is we don't do that only for our enjoyment. Of course, it is enjoyable, but it's the same as experiencing the handiwork of somebody that's close to you. When we come back, when we move at the speed of thought and come back and we see Jesus, we say, I can't believe what you did. Like, I was just at Saturn. My mind is blown. What an amazing creation. Praise you, the creator of all things. And we can do that face to face. Perhaps that's why we're so limited, because we can't really do that well face to face this side of heaven. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's interesting thought, especially on the limitation aspect of it. That's why we're so limited. But I would agree. Yeah, I mean, the whole point would be is to glorify God. I mean, that's the whole point of all our work in heaven.
Absolutely.
Because again, it's going back to the your analogy. Like if your father was an amazing painter, it's like when you see his work, it's going to be like, oh wow, that's so amazing. You're going to want to convey that and tell him that. And I think it'd be the same thing with God. And I mean, just imagine going across the universe to the other side and seeing just galaxy after galaxy. And Jesus will probably be right there with you, I mean, since he's omnipresent, he's gonna be right there sitting in the co-pilot chair.
This is making me weird out, or not weird out, but like kind of geek out. It's like, and he's explaining, when this popped into existence, let me tell you my thoughts. Like, I think when you start to consider heaven this way, to me, there's this eagerness that wells up, not because I'm selfish, but because I certainly am selfish, but that's not why. It's because it's like there's so much more to explore and understand about who God is that I'll never get to on this side of heaven. And it's exciting. It's not sitting in a lecture hall necessarily. Maybe if that's your jam, you want to sit in a lecture hall, God will let you sit in a lecture hall so that you can best glorify him that way. But for those of us who are like, oh man, I want to go see this, I want to go do that so I can come back and worship and glorify God because of what he's done. I think there's an element then to, like heaven isn't just a 9 to 5 every day working the job that God gave me.
Yeah, it's gonna be different because again, like even in the garden, sure, Adam's job was to take care of the garden, but as humans, that doesn't necessarily mean that is our job. It's going to be whatever it is to glorify God, whether you're a painter, a sculptor, like what Paul says in Romans, do everything for the glory of God. So I mean, yes, that would be your work here in this life, and I think also in heaven, it'd be your work itself is really for the glory of God.
Yeah. So I want to read a little bit from our article. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I want people to go read it. But it says we don't have. This is a quote from Anthony Hoekema, I think is how you pronounce his name, and he says the possibilities that now rise before us boggle the mind. Will there be better Beethovens on the new earth? Better Rembrandts? Better Raphaels? Shall we read better poetry, better drama, and better prose? Will scientists continue to advance in technological achievement? Will geologists continue to dig out the treasures of the earth? Will architects continue to build imposing and attractive structures? Will there be exciting new adventures in space travel? Our culture will glorify God in ways that surpass our most fantastic dreams. I think that is a perfect quote for what we're talking about. So of course, I'm a sci-fi guy. So I'm like, yeah, how awesome is it? Andromeda Galaxy? Boom, here I come. But, history buffs, people who want to know, I talked to someone, I want to get your thoughts on this. I talked to somebody who said, I think there will be an ability to kind of experience history alongside Jesus to say, this is what I was actually doing in this moment. Like, this is how my plan was being worked out. Where you go to David and Goliath and you actually observe the event and you're able to understand and comprehend exactly all the moving parts and the pieces of history that work together there. That's incredibly interesting to me. I don't know how time works, because in my mind, I'm still thinking, eternity is, eternity in the future. And so even with our idea of moving in space at the speed of thought, it's kind of like there's still physics involved there. Whereas, time travel or observing the past, that's outside of science right now. Certainly not outside of the realm of possibility of God. But yeah, that was just something I'd heard. What do you think of that?
Well, it doesn't even necessarily have to be time travel. It could just be God recalling the events and giving you a vision exactly as it was, as if you were there.
Yeah, that's good. See, this is why we talk to people, right?
I think that'd be super interesting. I mean, to actually be able to see, gosh, to watch different events throughout history and be like, oh yeah, God was like, oh, this is why I let this happen, and this is what I was trying to do. I mean, talk about really changing your perspective, reordering your perspective on all of history.
Yeah. So this is what we want to get done with this episode. We want people to open up their minds, not to unbiblical ideas, but to think of God as this maximally great being, as Tim and I are often fond of saying, and to say, well, what would a maximally great eternity look like? And it seems to me that facets of these things somehow would likely be incorporated into a maximally great eternal perspective that will fulfill John 17:3 in a way that will bring God the most glory, right? So it's not just I have a 9 to 5 in the New Jerusalem and I hang out and watch TV, right? It's I'm actually going to be experience God's handiwork in a way that I could never experience this side of heaven. And that's what we want people to explore.
Yeah.
So obviously we can't know for a fact of what it looks like, but I think I have come to the conclusion that this is more probable than not. Like my idea here, and I don't think it's my idea. Randy Alcorn, Hokema, other people have had similar strains of thought, maybe not articulated in the realm of, hey, if you like science fiction, you should like Jesus, because that's the only time you'll be able to live out this dream of science fiction. That's not the reason to place your faith in Jesus, but it is a perk of eternity. But again, all with the idea of we glorify God in the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, any closing thoughts if that you haven't been able to articulate as we've had this conversation?
Nothing really. Just that. My own conclusions. I start to think this is more and more probable than possible. Because don't want to be putting a God in a box here of what heaven can or can't be like. And of course it's we have to make sure we don't step outside of scripture and completely contradict it with our ideas of what heaven could be like. But it allows for a lot of room for imagining what it's going to be like. I don't think God is against us having an imagination about it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why we started with scripture, right? We started with John 17:3. We started with the fact that Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection. So it's not like we're just making these, well, wouldn't this be cool, baseless claim. We're saying, given these scriptural ideas that every Orthodox believer in Christianity would seem to affirm, I think it would entail this, right? And so we may be hopefully working on something in the near future that is much more academic on this topic. I'm super interested in it. I know our colleague Tim Stratton is as well. And the way we end our article is this. We say, so the next time someone tells you that the idea of heaven for an eternity sounds boring, perhaps direct their gaze to the stars, his handiwork, and ask them if they like Star Trek. Now, if they say no, then you might want to start with something else. But that's the idea. That's the idea. So heaven is not just sitting on a cloud. Heaven is not just clocking in a 9 to 5, your heavenly job every day for eternity and going, well, I wish this would end at some point. Did you ever see the show The Good Place?
I've seen episodes. I didn't watch it, but I get the idea of it.
Yeah. So the whole premise at the end of that show is that you get bored in eternity, and then you end up just releasing yourself to be annihilated because you're just done. You've experienced what you could experience. You've had the fun you could have. You're just done. That's an incredibly nihilistic way of thinking of eternity, but I think Christians often think that way about eternity.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously a lot of Christians, obviously we're all excited to see Jesus, but I think it is just kind of this unenthusiastic though, in a sense of like, okay, that's it. Because eternity it's so long and just incomprehensible. So I think for a lot of people, it's kind of the thought of something so long is almost scary to some people, but can also just
yeah. I was gonna say, well, especially now when our attention span is a TikTok video,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
and so it's like eternity. What will I do? So what Thomas and I hope is that if you're watching or listening to this, that your mind would be open to the idea that there is much more about eternity that we don't know that is exciting than that we do know that is boring. I know my wife has expressed even similar kind of like, okay, if we're not married in heaven, then like, will I know you? It's like, well, we'll have a perfect relationship, whatever it is. We'll have a perfect relationship, but marriage is clearly intended to fill the earth, and that part of our mandate will be over. And now we have to enjoy him forever. So whatever it looks like after that. But as we close here today, we just encourage people to think about Scripture and to let your mind expand in those areas of anticipating eternity. Am I right?
Yep.
All right, that's all we have for today. God bless you. And thanks for joining me, Thomas. This was fun. And go read Heaven and Science Fiction on freethinkingministries.com. It's from Thomas Moller and I. And as we always say here at FreeThinking Ministries, stay reasonable.